And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bench with Bubba, episode 151. Going to be joined by a good friend of ours. You can find him on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Bubba. Thanks so much for having me on again.
Yeah, it's a blast. I had a fun time the first time. I had a fun time joining you on your podcast. So I've had a fun time meeting you at the Barf draft. It's been a whirlwind couple months here. It's been fun.
Holy moly. Yeah, it is. It has been a ton of fun. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast last week. I just had a ton of fun going over 90 plus outfielders with you. It felt like 20 minutes, but it ended up being 2.5 hours. So
that's what I was laughing about. I've done some long podcasts before, and I've listened to some long podcasts, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And yours was like, it just felt like we were rolling. It really didn't feel like I look at the clock, I'm like, oh, geez, okay. But it was perfect. Why don't you let everybody know what you got going on, because you're a busy, busy man.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the best place to reach me is on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy, as you mentioned. I also have a website, batflipcrazy.com. I don't keep it updated as much as I'd like, but I will be posting some position-by-position rankings probably later tonight. So that should be available there. Those are probably the two best places to reach me. And then I have a podcast, BatFlipCrazy. Just search for that on iTunes or anywhere where you have a pod, where you listen to your podcasts, and you should be able to find it.
Oh yeah, he just has a podcast. He says it all nonchalantly. He only knocks out some of the best content out there. So I only have a podcast. So
that's awfully nice, but anybody can have a podcast these days. You'd be surprised the low barrier to entry.
It's so true, so true. It is getting easier and easier. So but I'm glad you got one out there. It's good stuff, and we'll let you not have to worry about hosting for the night, and I'll do all that dirty work while you just have some fun talking players. Cool. Let's talk about some recent news. There wasn't much going on until last day, basically. And it's kind of just speculation type stuff. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr., he has an oblique injury. He's going to pick up activities in 2 to 3 weeks. It coincidentally goes in play with kind of how they want to bring him up when they want to bring him up. At the same time, who knows? But I even saw some beat reporter saying, yeah, the news dropped this morning. I see him out here running in the outfield. So take it as you wish. But what's your thoughts on Vlad? Because some people still think it was crazy where he's being drafted. I saw Alex Fast tweeting about it the other day, and there's just kind of all into the spectrum. So you have Clay Link who's in love with him. So what's your thoughts on Vlad?
Yeah, I mean, I think the injury doesn't change a ton. I don't think because he was already going to start out in the minors. It does raise a little bit of a concern for me though, because he did miss a little bit last year with an injury as well, and we know that isn't necessarily players aren't technically injury prone, but with the body that he has, you just never know. And so I like him. I don't necessarily like him where he's going at his ADP. In the aggregate projection that I have, it has him for a 301 batting average, 75 runs, 21 home runs, and 79 RBI with 5 stolen bases. And so if he's drafted at an ADP of 43, he's losing you $5 at that point. And for me, I'm just a little bit more of a conservative drafter, which may be, a weakness given how good some of the young talent is coming up. But I'd rather probably go with someone who's a little bit better well-known, somebody like Anthony Rendon, maybe as my third baseman, who will have similar skills. I don't think necessarily has the same average upside, maybe, that Vlad does. And Vlad could certainly destroy the projection, but for me, I'm probably not going to have him on too many teams, if any, but it's not because I don't think he's a good player. It's more that I think there's plenty of talent going where he's going that I feel just fine grabbing it.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at with you. I somehow had him in the Barf League. I think I got him to get the end of the 3rd or 4th round, so I kind of felt like it was kind of worth the gamble, but I still wasn't comfortable with it. And injuries like this are going to happen more and more with him. I was making a joke with – might have been Eno Saris in the last, but I can't remember who it was, but it was about being Giants fans and seeing fat third basemen and seeing how hurt they get all the time.
Yeah, so, I remember that. Yeah, that was with Eno.
Yeah, so I've seen this happen before, and as a big guy like myself, we kind of get hurt doing stupid things because we're not meant to be doing athletic activities too much. So that does concern me all the time. It's like people say he's super agile, he's this, that, and he is, but it's still, your body's not supposed to look like that if you're supposed to be making high agility moves. and I'm looking at. I just pulled up my third base rankings. I had him going 8th out of my. I had Suarez, Rendon, and even Javi Baez going in front of them. And I almost put Chapman in front of them just because I like the stability, the kind of you were saying, over him. I think I took him in barf because of the OBP aspect of it, but the more I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. But it was fun while we were there. So yeah, we'll see how it works. Hopefully, it's just kind of a no big deal, and he's going to be on schedule to join the Jays in the middle of the end of April, something like that. All right, Adam Jones. This is kind of interesting one because I took him with like my 28th or 29th overall pick in TGFBI just as a flyer. He signs with the D-backs, and it's like one of the few teams where I wasn't super stoked on him going to. What's your thoughts on Adam Jones joining the Diamondbacks?
Yeah, I'm just not a fan of Jones. Like his year last year was pretty poor. I mean, he ended up with more than 600 plate appearances. The batting average was okay at 281, which is nice. But, only 15 home runs, pretty middling counting stats, the runs and RBI totals, 7 stolen bases isn't terrible, but he's not a guy who has good plate discipline. He never has. The contact skills are pretty good, but the power is the biggest concern for me. 15 home runs, and he actually only had 13.6 expected home runs according to XStats. And they also said that he got a little bit lucky on balls in play at 273 expected average, but close enough. So, I just don't see the upside necessarily that I see with other picks going in, probably around where he'll end up going in drafts at this point. I mean, he's at pick 319, so, it's pretty far into the draft. But, in that position, I might be looking for a younger guy with more upside. I think he's on the decline, and I don't necessarily see, normally, what is he like, 30, 35 or something like that? He's pretty 33, going to be 34 during the season. Like, your skills generally don't improve at that point in your career. They're generally going downhill. So I'm probably not going to go after him, but my valuation for him does, the projection that I have for him, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it has him as a $7 player at a $2 cost. So that's some pretty good value right there. I just don't think I'm going to be targeting him probably.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that kind of what's going around him is the interesting part. If you look at the TGFBI ADP, he's going around pick 353, and like right before him, you had like Lewis Brinson, Franchi Cordero. Right behind him, you had guys like Longo, Brett Gardner, Jung Ho Kang. Those are kind of the bats that are going around him. So outside of Longo and Gardner, some younger kind of flyer type plays like you're mentioning. So it is interesting. In NFBC since February 15th, he's going about 303. So I'm curious to see where it'll go. I did pull up roster resource real quick. It finally finished loading, and currently he's their 4th outfielder off the bench. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But in front of him, you have Ketel Marte. There's still theories that with the signing of Jones, maybe Marte comes back to the infield. I don't know how that's going to work out. But, Peralta and Steven Souza are pretty much locks where they're at. All right, let's talk some TGFBI. Again, like you said on your podcast, and I like to do every time I talk about TGFBI, thank you, Justin Mason, for putting on a awesome deal. If people don't know what it is, it's a 22-league, 15-team league. And it's pretty darn awesome. And it gets all the industry people that want to be in it are in it. And it's pretty cool. 2nd year in existence. And one of the cool parts about having you on, besides just being you, is you won your league last year. So first off, what do you think was like the turning point, or what was the main factor to you winning your league last year?
Oh man, that is a good question. To be honest with you, I sometimes wonder how I tied for first. I mean, just for context, like I finished 25th or 23rd in the overall, I think. So technically speaking, I wasn't one of the top 15 teams, just to be honest. And Brant Chester, who we tied in first place, exact same number of points. We were like even through 2 tiebreakers or something like that. He actually finished higher in the overall than I did. So I'll put that in there as context. I actually don't know, because my first draft pick was Jose Altuve. I also had Carlos Martinez, who pitched super well at the beginning of the year, but was gone for most of the rest of the year. I also had Elvis Andrus, who was like a huge dud. So when I think back of it, I drafted Alex Bregman. So I was super high on Bregman last year. I drafted him at pick 29, and that was huge for me. I also picked up Max Muncy during the season, which was key. And then I rode Luis Severino's first half. Like his second half really hurt me, but I didn't have him in my lineup for a lot of like September. And so I didn't get, I got pretty decent blow. But my pitching was terrible. Like I think I was like, my offense was very, very good. It was really well balanced. My pitching was not very good, but my offense was able to carry me with some, I think, key pickups. And did I pick up? Yeah, I think, yes, I got Adalberto Mondesi in that league too, which was super, super helpful. I want to say I had Adalberto Mondesi in that league. Yeah, I think so. So that was very helpful, in making up some ground. So I think I got a little lucky, if I'm honest. But it was a lot of fun. It was a tough league. So very excited to be playing in the Champions League for sure.
Yeah, you're one of the big boys in the Champions League, and it is loaded, as people would expect.
The smallest of the big boys. Let me tell you, some of the names that are in there, household names.
Yeah, you're always so humble. I pulled up the draft board on the TGFBI link, and the only thing that's bugging me, and it's not just this league, it's all of them, is they don't have any of the names there anymore. So I don't know who's who, teams 1 through 15. But we'll get to that in a minute. I want to go back to your last year, and there is a lot. Like, I don't want to say you were lucky because that downplays all the work you put into it. But I know what you're saying as a guy that plays a lot. There is a lot of luck in, like, okay, did you win that fab? Did you do this? Like, there's things that have to bounce your direction in a season that's like 6 months long. There's a lot of things that have to go your way. But at the same time, you put the work in to do it. When you're doing fab, like, this is kind of a thing. It's more and more prevalent. There's not very many leagues anymore that don't do fab, and it was kind of the opposite for a long time. One thing that your podcast does, and you tweet about a lot with your deals, is kind of trying to get on guys early and be that week or two early so you don't have to pay for them. Like Smata tweeted out a list of his fab picks last year. He's in the Champions League with you, and he got Alberto for $0. Like, he had all these guys super cheap, and some worked, some didn't, but those ones that worked were tremendous. When you're doing your fab process, what do you go through? Because I get really envious of you guys that can look ahead like 2 weeks early and figure this stuff out. And I'm literally going to sit back and listen like I'm a listener. What do you do to make this happen?
So I think there's a few components to it. Number one, I think, is just like the research to know what might be happening. So number one, like, I'm on Twitter and I'm following what's happening. I'm following the news. I'm thinking about, like, all right, if that ends up happening, like they say it's going to happen, what does that mean for X players playing time? But I think more than that. So one of the things that I'm always do, like, I love the leaderboards at Fangraphs. And so what I'll frequently do is I have kind of 4 things that I like to look at a lot. I like to look at O-swing, which is kind of like a proxy for plate discipline. So how frequently does a player swing at a pitch outside the zone? I like to look at contact rate, Z contact in particular, so in-zone contact rate. So if a player is swinging at a pitch in the zone, how often do they make contact? Essentially a proxy for, putting balls in play, which is good for batting average. I look at hard hit rate, quality of contact metrics, and then I look at ground ball and fly ball rate. So low ground ball rates, higher fly ball rates, but not too high. And I just kind of try to look at the names that are on that list. A lot of them are guys that are already taken, obviously, but then you'll see kind of interesting people show up on there. And if they can have a sustained presence, and I may do a little bit of further investigation. Okay, like, where are they batting in the batting lineup, or where are they batting in the lineup? Who's around them? Do they have any other history of being successful in this particular thing? So I'm always looking at those leaderboards. Like, literally, I do that multiple times a week, where I'll just look through them and I'll scroll through them, and I'll go all the way from the top maybe to league average to see to kind of identify guys. And then one thing, if you follow me on Twitter, I send out, like, every week I send out an XWOBA leaderboard from Baseball Savant, and then a barrel leaderboard. And so that's like XWOBA, is just kind of, one of the things I think that like you mentioned, like, to save money on fab and to get guys, increase your likelihood of getting guys, you got to get them before they break out, right? And a lot of times there's signs there, whether it's improved skills, whatever it is. Sometimes, like, the skills improve and they break out and it's too late. But for some guys, like, one guy who pops out is Jesse Winker last year. Winker was really struggling, and he wasn't hitting for a lot of power. And then I noticed him showing up on he's normally on the O swing, but then I saw him showing up on the Z contact leaderboards, and then he started showing up a little bit on the hard hit rate. And so I was kind of in on him, or at least like identifying him early. Same thing with Max Muncy with the barrels. So I send those things out because xwOBA, instead of telling you like what a player did, they tell you what a player theoretically should have done. And if there's a discrepancy, like if I'm seeing guys on there that I'm not seeing show up in some of the outcome related things or like who aren't getting press, I'm really intrigued because that means that they're making quality of contact, they're walking, and it doesn't catch everybody because it's like not stolen bases, but there's that. And then there's the barrel, there's barrels per plate appearance, just overall barrels. And that's telling me quality of contact, particularly around like power metrics and extra base hits. I think looking at those things, if there's guys who like are in like 4 of those 6 things or something like that, then that kind of sets off an alarm in my head, like be monitoring that guy or maybe put a push to it. So that's one element of it. The second element is I use ESPN has a fantasy forecaster that Tristan Cockcroft puts out, and then Fantasy Pros has a weekly planner. And so I like to take a look at that before Fab just to see like, are there guys who are heavy stolen base guys that have a good matchup for stolen bases? That's the only one, the forecaster for ESPN, that I know shares that has like a stolen base number. They essentially give like 1 to 10. 10 means it's a great matchup. 1 is a terrible matchup. And that also gives like the matchups for, each one of the matchups throughout the week. And overall. And so that tells me like, if I've got a couple guys I'm deciding on, that may sway me looking at righty lefty matchups. Like that's the thing is you got to put in a lot of time to kind of squeeze out all of that extra value. And so I'll take a look at that, but then I'll think about who the terrible teams are. This sounds bad, but like, let's say like the White Sox, the Orioles, the Padres, the Giants. No, I'm just kidding. All of those teams, I'll actually look who they're playing the next week or the week after that. And so I'm thinking like, okay, well, here's a hitter that seems to be doing pretty well. He's got a tough matchup this week, but next week they're going against the Orioles, and I want my guys in the lineup for the Orioles. And especially as we get later in the season, I'll do that more and more because I know like for the teams that are competing for a victory, like the pressure is pretty intense. And then I think the last piece is just, I would say that I'm like selectively aggressive on Fab. Like I'll put in a lot of low bids for guys, like maybe to stream pitchers or, to just take a flyer on a guy or something like that for a week. But if I see a guy who's got the skills and like an opportunity change, like they move from batting 7th to batting cleanup, or, I just love the skills and they have a history of somehow performing, or I get a really good feeling about them, then I'm going to go pretty hard in terms of the amount of money that I'm willing to put in for Fab, because there's only so many real game changers that show up on Fab. And so I think that saves me enough money to like be able to do the small little ones, but then also go after the guys that I really want. And sometimes I hit them. Like I got 350 in on Ryan Zimmerman last year, I think, when he hit the waiver wire in TGFBI, and that didn't come of anything. And like Smata, I got Mondesi for like $1.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of really, really helpful stuff there you're bringing up, because I know for the Fangraphs leaderboards, for one, the graphs they have there and everything, watching you utilize those, it's like you could have done that blindfolded. You have quite the experience on that stuff. So it's pretty cool things. And I've been digging in more and more on xwOBA, Barrel, like pretty much a lot of my off-season stuff. I've been just like glued on Baseball Savant. There's a lot of interesting things you can see there. Like you mentioned X batting average already earlier, and there's a lot of little telltale signs. And I've told people forever that's listening to the shows, I keep trying to learn more of these advanced stats. I was that kind of caveman curmudgeon forever that's like, I just watch the games. I don't need to know anything else. There's nothing to it. Well, that's obviously not the truth anymore. And if you want to compete still, you don't have to go 100% into these kind of things, but you still have to have a basis on them. So I'm going to do more.
And now you're top 15 in TGFBI projected standings.
Yep.
So
there's only one place to go but down.
Pretty good indication of somebody who's picked it up pretty quick.
I appreciate that. No, I was very, very happy with my draft. We can go over my team at the end just kind of real quickly. You can pick it apart. The problem is you're too nice, so you probably won't pick it apart. But we can go over.
I already talked trash about Vlad Jr. and Adam Jones, who apparently are both on your Barf League roster. So I felt bad about that.
Oh, good. I want this. Like, I love constructive criticism. Bring it on. So we'll get to that towards the end. Like I told you before the pod, and we've kind of already started with this. this is kind of be a free flowing. We're going to go through your team and there's kind of players around it. Maybe talk a little more in depth about certain players than others. But the main thing is it's kind of more of a draft strategy. There's not a ton of like draft strategy focused podcasts. And I like the way you look at things and take the whole spectrum about it. So I wanted to kind of go through your draft, kind of how your process went when you were going about it, especially in this league, because it was pretty intense watching you guys tweeting out different things, all your different members of the league. And it's a cutthroat league. There's a lot of really tough leagues out there, but yours obviously has all the champions in it. So very, very difficult. First off, which team were you? Because like I said, I have no names here.
I am team 14.
So you start out with Altuve again.
I should have asked you ahead of time. Like, I should have been like, hey, which team do you really like on here?
That would have been a good one. Yeah. Rank them 1 through 15 and see where 14 ends. But before we actually start on the players perspectively, one last thing. What was your strategy going into this draft, knowing A, it's going to be really difficult with these guys, and B, I know you've done a ton of research. So when you did Barf, you had like you had the game plan and you executed it very, very well. What was your plan in this one?
Yeah, I mean, so going into the draft, like number one, I think I know that draft order isn't supposed to matter, but I was a little bummed out to be getting the 14th pick. That was my 13th choice, which was a little sad. So for me, like I much more prefer to be in the first half of the draft, I think this year, just because I think a lot of my strategy relies upon relies upon because I can be adaptive, but I really like getting 2 aces in the first 3 rounds. Like if I can get, a Trout, a Betts, a Turner, a Yelich, or even like a Scherzer early on, and then, I should have access to 2 aces around that same point. Although I think that that's becoming a little bit of a question mark, with Luis Severino having the injury. I imagine he'll fall back a little bit. And so that's one fewer pitcher there. So when I got the 14th pick, I was a little disappointed, mostly because, not because I think there's a lack of talent available at the back end of the draft, but I think it lends itself much better to, to getting just one of those elite starting pitchers, right? And I was actually prepared heading in. I actually thought I was going to have to get 2 starting pitchers in my first 2 picks in the draft. So going into the draft, I really like Jose Altuve this year. I have him as like my number 7 or 8th overall player. I just think, especially in a league where there's an overall, I think that, the scarce categories are batting average and stolen bases. And while Altuve, I don't think is going to steal those 30 bags, he stole 17 last year. And I think he's good for low 20s, mid 20s. And his batting average, he was hitting 329 before he got injured last year. And so I don't think a batting average, his projection is like 311. Aggregate projection that I have is 311, but I anticipate that he'll hit higher than that as long as he stays healthy, which is a question mark given like he's already feeling discomfort in his left side, which is great. And so, I was hoping Altuve would fall to me, but I didn't necessarily expect that was going to happen because he's been going now like around the kind of 10, 11, 12 area. And so when he fell to me, I was pretty pleased, although I was also a little sad because I do love having those 2 aces. Especially in a league like this where going in the draft, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but it became clear pretty early on that all of the kind of pockets of value that I've identified, or the places where I generally have players, where my ranking is higher than maybe the ADP and where I feel like I can make a little bit of value, that pretty much everybody else in the draft had the exact same players and that wasn't going to happen. And so really it was about trying to pick the best player at that time, really regardless of ADP, because guys could go anywhere. And that kind of, that's how it kind of played out. And I was thinking that it would work kind of like that. So going in, I was thinking, Altuve in the best case scenario. And I thought that I would probably be getting Justin Verlander as my pitcher. He's my number 3 starter, Scherzer, DeGrom, Verlander, and then Sale, obviously because of Sale's injury concerns. I think just on a pitch by pitch basis, I think Sale's the best pitcher in the game. But I really wanted volume up top, especially since I wasn't going to be able to get another ace. And so in my other scenario, strategically, it would have been Chris Sale and Justin Verlander that I would have gotten, or Garrett Cole and Justin Verlander. But it ended up being Altuve and Verlander, which I was very pleased about, to be honest. That Altuve fell to me, although it did, and it played out like this. It did create some major challenges for me around this.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna ask how that played out, because I know you're a big starting pitcher guy, and watching you go Altuve, Verlander, and we'll get your next pitcher's not a reliever at Doolittle in the 8th round. So I know that's big for you. And the guys that went before Altuve is pretty much your standard, what you'd expect in a draft. And then Goldschmidt and Machado went on the turn there, and then you got Verlander. You mentioned you might have gone Sale Verlander or Cole Verlander, and I agree. I think this 2 starting pitcher setup at least really helps, because I was glad I did it, because you can kind of, if you get 2 aces, you can really focus on your bats if you want, and leave the starters as, the guys on the sleeper on the bus like to call it the glob. You can just avoid the glob if you want to, and go get some later. What was stopping you from going Verlander Cole?
Right there at the beginning, I think it's just that I had Altuve kind of ranked higher up. So generally speaking, I think the 2 starting pitcher works for me, because I think, number one, I think that the starting pitchers this year, from like a valuation perspective, those top guys are, they're the highest valued ones. If you look at my, the combined rankings, and so what I've done, it's nothing like creative on my own part, but like I aggregated a bunch of sections, and then I used the valuation, the SGP, valuation with Tanner Bell's SGP tool to generate the values, and it's like Trout and Betts at the top, and then it's Sale, Scherzer, DeGrom. Verlander is the 4th starting pitcher, the 8th overall player. Kluber's next at the 13th. Garrett Cole's at the 17th. So on and so forth, and the numbers are pretty high. And so I just think it's like the way the draft plays out this year really lends itself to to that strategy, because I think there's a lot of very, very good hitters that are available, and there isn't a ton that distinguishes them, right? Like, like for instance, Manny Machado, for instance, like, the difference between, Manny Machado and say like a Freddie Freeman or something like that, like, is not that much. Just like the difference between, Adam Bregman or Alex Bregman and Anthony Rizzo isn't that much. There's a lot of really compact values that maybe have $1 or $2 difference among those hitters. And so I felt pretty good about that. And I also feel good about some of the value picks. I actually had my first 4 picks planned out. Like if everything went according to plan, I would get Altuve, Verlander, Bogaerts, and Puig. And so, that kind of worked out for me in a sense. But I wanted to load up early on batting average, and I wanted to load up on speed as much as possible. Although knowing that like I wasn't going to get Turner, I wasn't going to get Marte where I was drafting. Some of the higher stolen base guys, Merrifield wasn't going to get back to me either. And so I knew that it was more like a balanced approach that I was probably going to have to take, where, maybe I wasn't going to get a guy who got me like 40 stolen bases or 35 stolen bases. But if I could put together a string of guys who are like 20 to 25 or, 15 to 20, then I was going to have a pretty good baseline. And I was trying not to hurt my batting average at all, because one thing I've found is as I've gone through a bunch of these drafts is like, if you're hurting in batting average or stolen bases towards the end of the draft, like good luck. Or even in the middle of the draft, like good luck to you on creating a balanced team, because it's just brutal out there. So that was kind of how I had thought about it. And so it's like, it's not that in any situation I would be taking 2 starters, or, that the dynamic has changed that much from last year necessarily. But I just think that the valuations of the players in the current context really lends itself to that. And like you mentioned, like you just kind of press pause on pitchers for an extended period of time in that case. But unfortunately, I was not able to do that just with getting Verlander as my only starter in the first 9 rounds.
Yeah, you piece it together, and we'll get to that in a minute. Towards the end of round two, a little bit of a rush. You had Marte, Snell, then Benintendi, Blackman, Soto. A little interesting there because you see Benintendi going in front of Marte a lot, and you see Soto and Blackman it's kind of a toss-up at times. So that was interesting. And to start round three, the pitchers came off the board: Kluber, Carrasco, Severino. Then you have Rizzo, then Bauer. You mentioned Merrifield and his speed, Chris Bryant, then Buehler and Syndergaard. So 6 of the first 9 picks of the third round. All those aces that maybe if one of those fell back to you, would you have gone them instead of Xander Bogaerts?
That's a good question. I think maybe if Buehler or Syndergaard, if Trevor Bauer had made it back there, definitely, because I love Trevor Bauer. He's my number 6 ranked pitcher this year after Verlander and Cole. Buehler and Syndergaard, I would have had to think long and hard about it. I do like both of them this year. Obviously, Buehler has the questions about the innings pitched, for the Dodgers. But I think, with some of the injuries they already have, I think they're going to rely on Buehler a little bit more. And so maybe that pushes him from 160 to 180. And with 180, I think it's going to be a really, really nice, it's going to be a nice pitcher. He should get a decent amount of wins, as much as you can project those. And then I think the ratios are going to be really nice, as are the Ks. And then I actually like Syndergaard a lot this year. I think there's a couple adjustments he could make to kind of get back to the level he was before, including throwing his four-seam fastball more instead of his sinker, which I believe I've heard he's doing in spring training. So that'll be really interesting. But I really like Bogaerts. I think he made some really encouraging steps forward last year. His ground ball rate was down, so he was hitting the ball in the air more. Plate discipline improved. He maintained borderline elite contact. And he was injured. So I think the stolen base total you saw last year, which was single digits, is not a true testament to his speed and stolen base ability. I think you're going to see him be closer to that 15 stolen base total where he's been the 2 previous years. And so, I really like him a lot. I think he could lead the league in RBI, batting behind JD Martinez, Mookie Betts, and Andrew Benintendi. So I really like him where he was going. So he's been a guy that I really want to target. And generally, I've been earlier on in drafts, and so I haven't had a chance to grab him. So I wanted to make sure I grabbed him when he was available there.
If for some reason, right before Bogaerts was Adalberto Mondesi, if Mondesi fell there, would you go Mondesi over Bogaerts?
Oh, man, Bubba, these are good questions. I definitely thought about it because I do think that one of the challenges in building a team is if you don't have one of those elite stolen base guys, it's almost like you can't take a break if you want to have a really good stolen base totals. So I kind of went a little bit off the cuff when I grabbed Gary Sanchez in the 5th round, just because he'd fallen so far. I have him as the 24th or 23rd best hitter, I think, because of the 2-catcher league. And so he was a huge value right there, and I couldn't really pass him up. But that he's not going to get me any stolen bases. So instead of going Rosario and Robles, which I was considering doing right there, I went Sanchez and Rosario. And, later on in the draft, I was a little bit man, did I mess up there? Because, I'm a little concerned about my speed. Even though I've got a lot of guys who contribute, I think I'm relying on a few people to get over projection or to get somebody on the wire in order to really meet what I want to hit in terms of, my stolen base total. But, that was a decision that I made that, was a little bit challenging. I love Adalberto Mondesi. I think grabbing him at 44 would have been totally fine with me. I'm perfectly fine grabbing him right there. So if he had fallen, it was definitely in my mind as I was following the slow draft. I was definitely having that conversation internally between Mondesi and Bogaerts. And it's very possible that I would have gone with Mondesi in that case, just because it would have allowed me maybe to be a little bit more creative and go after, some batting average guys, maybe go a little bit earlier after Justin Turner, somebody like that, a real high batting average guy. But yeah, that's how it kind of worked out.
Okay. You mentioned at 4 you had Puig, 5 you have Gary Sanchez, and to remind people, it's a 2-catcher league, so Gary makes a big, big move there. And as we'll talk about with your 9th round pick, it's probably good you have Gary Sanchez.
Oh man, let's not talk about it.
But after Sanchez, you went Kenley Jansen, Ozzie Albies, and then you got your boy Eddie Rosario. So your 6th round pick was Eddie. We know how much you like him. You took him right in front of Conforto, Castellanos, my boy Victor Robles, even a couple picks, Marcell Ozuna, Mitch Haniger. So a lot of outfielders went off the board. They're quite a big run. And, outfielders always deep because there's so many of them. But at the same time, this is a 5-outfielder league. So if you start waiting too long, it's sketchy. So now you have Puig, you have Rosario locked down. Real quick for everybody, what is it that you like about Eddie Rosario so much?
Yeah, and just before I get to that, one thing I'll say about Yasiel Puig is I think I have the minimum in the pick for him in the world with my 4th-round pick. I grabbed him at 47, which is probably about 30 spots ahead of his ADP right now. But I had him as the 44th best player overall from a valuation standpoint, and I like him to beat his projection this year. And so, I love Puig. I just think the profile is incredibly balanced outside of batting average, but I don't think he'll hurt you there. And I think his swing is going to work really, really well in the Great American Ballpark. And so, that might have been probably my most controversial. Not that like any picks really in these leagues are quote unquote controversial enough, but I think that was kind of my biggest reach maybe. For Rosario, I really loved Rosario heading into last year. He had a great first half of the season, and then he really struggled afterwards. Brian Slack had a tweet where he kind of pointed out that Rosario took a couple games off after injuring his shoulder. And I think it was like June, like late June, maybe early July, something like that. And from that point forward, his power was pretty much zapped, and he really struggled with some of with his managing the zone. Like his O swing got off the rails. Like he really seemed to be struggling from a skills perspective. And so that was after, a solid year of just putting up terrific numbers. And he's a guy who should hit for a pretty high batting average. He has a low strikeout rate, makes a decent amount of contact, swings at a lot of pitches, which I think, reduces that strikeout rate because he can swing and miss, and, it's just strike one. He's still cutting and taking hacks. I think he's got a balanced profile. He's going to be the cleanup hitter probably, or bat third in the Twins lineup in front of Nelson Cruz. He steals some bases. He's fast, but he doesn't steal a ton of bases. Like I think 8 or 9 I'd be fine with that for the year. But that's enough for me at this spot where he provides a pretty balanced profile. And so, just as like a sense of the league, like Michael Conforto's ADP is like 104 in most leagues. He went at 75, to Clay Link right there. And I think that's a great pick. I think Conforto is going to be really, really good this year. He obviously struggled early last year coming back from the injury, but second half he was off the hook. I think Victor Robles is going to be super good. So there's a lot of couple guys that I really loved going there too, but I think Rosario has probably the most balanced profile among that group. And so that's the reason why I went there, because I was really trying to have as much balance as possible earlier on to give me the room later on to make a couple moves where maybe I was getting a guy that was going to hurt my batting average or wasn't going to have as many stolen bases. And Altuve, Bogarts, Puig, and Rosario, all 4 of those guys have very balanced profiles, which I like a lot. And I think they're also, the valuation that I have for them makes them a pretty significant value where they're going right now.
Yeah, they'll definitely give you a little bit of everything, so that's good there. You mentioned Conforto going early. He went pick 78 in yours, and yes, Clay Link gets the prize for that one. That is the highest he's gone. But like I said on your show, I think big things are coming for him. He came back too early last year, so I like Conforto quite a bit. After that outfield run, you had a couple relievers in Chapman Vasquez. You had Andujar, your boy Gallo, Carpenter, AJ Pollock, D. Gordon. Then we go to round 7. We got Matt Olson, and some more relievers come off the board. You have Brad Hand and Travis Shaw, Kimbrel, Mikolas, Wheeler, Justin Turner, Jesus Aguilar, Corey Seager, Roberto Osuna, Scooter Gennett, Luis Castillo, David Price, and then you get one of your stolen base helps, it looks like. I'm assuming where you went with this, unless I'm missing something. Yeah. You went with Will Myers. First off, was there anybody that was sniped from you before that, or were you settling on Will Myers? You're going, I need stolen bases.
David Price was on my radar. I was hoping that he fell to me right there. My math isn't very good, but let's see. I think that's pick, 74 plus 30. That was pick 104. So with David Price still on the board, I was probably going to draft David Price if Clay hadn't picked him up. Where he had fallen, I just think like if you look at Price last year, he improved as the year progressed. He started throwing a changeup more often, and that changeup was a really good pitch for him. And he started throwing his cutter more than his sinker, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And both of those combined to really lift up some of the skills that had been dwindling earlier. Actually, in my other TGFBI, think of like, I mean, I traded David Price for Fernando Rodney in my TGFBI. So that didn't work out for me. Yeah, I was desperate for saves, and I have a special love for Fernando Rodney, which is unexplainable. And so that was a terrible thing. Price was having real big struggles earlier in the year, and the skills just didn't look good. And so I wasn't a big fan of his. I wanted to kind of sell high on him, and that didn't end up working out for me. But I liked him just, I think, also from an innings pitch standpoint. You know, he's going to give you a lot of volume. He's pitching with the Red Sox, so I think wins will be possible there. And I think he's going to pitch probably a lot more loose. I don't know if this isn't any analytical thing, but he's already won that championship. You know, he put up an MVP level performance in that World Series. And I think that's going to maybe take a little bit of, not necessarily the pressure, but just allow him to pitch a little bit more loosely. He went, but I was totally fine taking Will Myers right here. I was glad that he fell. You know, I think his projection is for like 24 home runs and 18 stolen bases and 550 or so plate appearances, aggregate projection. You know, that's really nice. I think if he isn't injured, if he stays healthy throughout the full season, you know, I think you're looking at another 30-20 season probably from him. His contact rate actually improved towards the end of last year, so maybe even the batting average takes a little bit of a bump. But at this point, I felt like I needed more stolen bases and not empty stolen bases, you know, like stolen bases that fit into an overall nice profile. And so I was more than happy to take Will Myers right here, just to give you a sense of like, you know, I think how good the draft was. Like Victor Robles going at pick, 79. Gallo went, you know, about 30 picks ahead of ADP. And based on the projections, he's a huge value even going where he's going. You know, the same thing with Shaw, like Travis Shaw going there. Justin Turner went much higher than his ADP. All these guys who, like, you know, I've relied on my value for kind of in the low 100 picks were already off the board by the time I was drafting at 104. And I was also considering Kyle Hendricks, and so he probably would have been my next pick if Brent Chesser hadn't drafted him on the turn. I like Hendricks' ratios. Like the Ks aren't great, but ratios are going to be okay. Where they're going to be good, I think, and the wins are going to be there probably. And so I feel okay about getting felt good about getting Hendricks coming back the other way. After that happened and there wasn't many good closers left, I felt like Doolittle was probably my best option. You know, there's obviously the injury concerns with him. I picked him over Yates, and like the next day there was news that Kimbrel might sign with the Nationals, and I was like, awesome, that's great. You know, I love Kirby Yates. I love Doolittle. I also like Leclerc a lot as well, who went a little bit later on, as well as Knievel. And this was before Jeffress got injured. So, you know, if I had to do it over again, I might take Yates or Leclerc with this pick. But, you know, Doolittle is so good when he does pitch. I think the ratios I felt like would help out since my starting pitchers were not going to, you know, we're going to come from kind of a, not necessarily high risk group. I mean, somewhat high risk group. Okay, they're high risk, you know, but strong skill guys. And I really wanted like those ratios to go along with the saves. And if he gets me 25 saves from that position, I'm perfectly fine as long as he pitches well.
Yeah, no, I like Doolittle a lot. The Holland news is, or not Holland, Kimbrel news was quite worrisome. I'd be surprised if they do it, but if they do it, that's just sucks. And I was going to ask you about Yates and Leclerc, so I know how much you liked them. So you answered that one. The Rodney love is cool, and if you need to, you probably should just do it in case you get bored someday. Go get the Flat Bill Crazy accounts lined up just so you can have two.
Flat Bill Crazy.
A sister account with Fernando Rodney. I go that route. But the other thing you mentioned there was the ADP thing, kind of throwing it out the window, and that's something I noticed in mine as well. I don't know if it's quote unquote experts trying to outsmart each other, or that we all know we all have the same kind of idea, like you said earlier, on value. I got to a point in my draft where, you use ADP as a tool, and this kind of just said, screw it, we're going. And so that was definitely a trend I noticed in mine as well. And when you pull up the result ADP by Shimada, you can definitely see a whole slew of different places that players went, and it's pretty interesting to see how that all played out. After you took Doolittle, you mentioned Yates and Knable and some other guys went off the board. And it gets into a part of the draft now where you really start looking, I think, more so at your needs. And you look to lock up catcher with Gary Sanchez and Salvador Perez. Obviously, the bad news came on Salvi. I don't know when you drafted him, but a few days later, probably.
Yeah.
We'll get to who you replaced him with, but you took Cervelli later. That's a solid replacement. I know how much you like Cervelli. So not the end of the world there. Obviously, not ideal situation. We don't have to go too much into that. But around that, it went Yadier Molina, Jose Alvarado, and then you took Rich Hill, your second starting pitcher off the board in round 10. What is it with Rich Hill? Because, some people love him. Some people want nothing to do with him because he's a blister god. What made you say, okay, I can take him as my second starting pitcher?
Yeah, I think with Hill, I just love the fact that when he's pitching, he should give you good ratios, right? Like towards the end of last year, he was back to his elite self. When you look at all of the metrics from like swinging strike to O swing and in zone contact rate, when you look at the spin rates and things of that nature, like Hill is the same guy he's been. And so, what I decided after I missed out overall on like some of the other aces, and I never really considered, taking any other starting pitchers, at the kind of the three in the third and fourth round there, just because like, I think some of them are at their value, but they're not necessarily values where they're going, I don't think, at least. And so that's why I kind of shied away from them. And then I just didn't have a ton of really good options at that point that I liked a lot. And so I was kind of, I was tough. Like if you look at the fourth round, like Corbin, Clevenger, Paxton, Flaherty, Marquez, 50 round Berrios. And after that, there isn't much left in terms of starting pitchers until these guys. And so I decided kind of at that point that I was going to go after guys I felt like had good skills that would provide me with solid ratios and, strikeouts per inning. They may not necessarily give me the volume, but maybe I would backfill some volume later on, or else take more of, like it's much harder to do in 15-team leagues, especially ones that are where FAB is going to be so competitive. It's really hard to stream good, decent pitchers. But like, I kind of just made a decision at that point, I'm going to go for volume in terms of starting pitchers. So a lot of my bench is probably going to be starting pitchers. And I'm going to go for some higher ratio or some better ratio guys early on. And so Hill, I think, is a really good example of that. Like the other pitchers that were going around this point, I considered Masahiro Tanaka. That was the other guy that I was considering. But, Tanaka's ERA has never been great. His whip has always been really solid. But, the ERA is a little finicky because of the home run totals that he gives up. I think he's a really good pitcher. I think he's undervalued right now. But, I liked Hill better for that reason, because as a pitcher, I just think he's better when he pitches. And so he's not going to get me my 200 innings or my 180 or even probably potentially 160. But, I'm going to get him, and then I'm going to hope that through the waiver wire, FAB, and like some of the late round targets that I have, that I can help make up some of that volume.
Okay. Like Buxton, Hamilton, NCR takes some speedy guys went through there to help people in steals. But after Hill, like Eduardo Rodriguez, Cole Hamels, Chris Archer, Robbie Ray, Mad Bum, Pavetta, Tanaka, Heaney, Happ, Glasnow, a lot of kind of questionable guys, but you could have took them. They went after Hill. Then you went to Joe Musgrove. I know you have a deep, deep love for Joe Musgrove. So were you happy getting Musgrove, or were you targeting one of those other guys that went after Hill to get back to you?
No, I was going after Musgrove here. I feel like Musgrove, I knew I had to reach for him, right? Like, because I know a lot of the competition. I mean, like the guys who are in this league are super sharp. And, and that's why I think the ADP kind of goes out the window, right? Because we all realized pretty early on that we were working from pretty similar valuations. And so instead of like, you just couldn't wait to get your guys. You had to go out and get your guys. And Musgrove is a guy that I've liked a lot for since the end of last year. The skills really consolidated well, although the outcomes didn't towards the end of the year. Had a really nice pitch mix. His slider is very good. His changeup is very, very good. And so I think he has the pitch mix, if he uses it right, to make that leap into not necessarily an elite starter, because we haven't even seen the innings pitched yet from Musgrove, but into one of those guys who produces, kind of like fourth, fifth round value. And so I knew that I was going to go after him. His whip should also be good. He's always around, the plate. He's got a very high first pitch strike rate. He's in the zone a ton. He walks very few guys, and he doesn't necessarily have some of the same level of batted ball issues. I think that some of the other high skilled guys that go around this area do. And so that's why I like him a lot. I did get him at 164, which is about 60 picks from where at least his ADP used to be. I think he's a guy that's going to move up in drafts, and so I was excited to get him there. I wish I could have waited maybe a little bit with the guys that were in this room, knowing in particular that some of them really liked Musgrove. I knew that he wasn't going to get back to me, so I had to take him at this point.
Yeah, no, I like that pick quite a bit. I'm looking. Yeah, you got him at pick 164. I got fortunate and got him at 216. So
nice.
I'll gladly take that. But
for sure, I'll take that all day.
Yeah, right after Musgrove went Hampson and Andrelton Simmons. So Chester went heavy on the middle infield options there. And then you got a pick, which I think can be a really, really, really nice steal of assuming health is there. And that's an assumption we have to make, but that's kind of baked into the draft price. You got him at pick 167. Yu Darvish could be outstanding. I know we're not supposed to care too much about spring, but for a guy coming back from an injury, I'm paying a little more attention. He looks outstanding right now. You have to be pretty happy with Yu Darvish to be your fourth starting pitcher after, taking Verlander in round 2 and then waiting for a while. You have Verlander, Hill, Musgrove, and now Yu Darvish as your fourth pitcher. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I just felt like the potential, like I knew that I had to start taking some risks with starting pitching. And I hadn't heard anything terrible, the news from Darvish. This was before I knew that he was throwing 97 in the spring. And a lot of times we'll hear don't pay much attention to spring training. But one thing I definitely do pay attention to is velocity. And I'd just give a shout out to Jeff Zimmerman, who keeps a spring velocity Google sheet. So if you follow Jeff or you don't follow Jeff, follow him at Jeff. I think it's W Zimmerman. He provides updates on starter velocity that's available or pitcher velocity that's available. And it's a really, really helpful tool in the spring because if a guy's velocity is down, that's huge, especially if it's down a lot, right? If we're talking like 1 or 2 miles per hour, no big deal. But if there's a sizable jump or dip in velocity, then that's something. And Darvish throwing 97 and saying his pitches haven't looked this good in his entire life, that helped ease the pain of the Sal Perez injury for sure. I just felt like right here, he was worth the risk. I'm actually not a huge fan of Darvish. I haven't owned him in the 2 previous years just because I felt like he just wasn't elite, and he was going at an elite cost in previous years. At this point in the draft, I just felt like I needed to take him. If Andrelton Simmons had, no, I don't think I was going to go Simmons here. I was thinking about it because I knew that I needed batting average after taking Sal Perez and Will Myers as my last 2 hitters, that I would need, a little bit of batting average there. So I was considering Andrelton Simmons at the time, but I thought that and then when he went, I was thinking, maybe Jorge Polanco will fall to me, but he ended up going, at pick 180, which is about 20 picks, 18 picks ahead of his ADP. So there was no way he was getting back to me. I was really hoping he would. But I'm really happy with Darvish here. I think he's he's one of those guys who how he does is really going to determine how successful my team is. If he gets back to where he's been in the past, then I think I can compete. If he doesn't, then it's going to take a lot of good fortune lower down on my draft board to make up for it.
Definitely. And you mentioned Hamilton Simmons. Chester taking him at 166, definitely the highest in any draft. Our draft, not myself, but our draft got him at 280. That was the lowest. So quite the difference in draft options there with Hamilton Simmons. So seeing him go there kind of surprised me a bit. I understand it completely, what he was doing. It was very, very interesting. And then a lot of starting pitchers went off the board, a couple of relievers. You mentioned Jorge Polanco. He wrapped up round 12. And then the likes like Brandon Nimmo, JBJ, Jesse Winker, who you mentioned earlier, Nick Senzel even went off the board in the middle of round 13. A couple more relievers. Eric Hosmer goes off the board right before you got your boy Jake Bauers. Were you like, I know you already mentioned the idea of getting like Jorge Polanco when he came back. Were you looking at Jake Bauers in this spot, or was it kind of like so many pieces got taken ahead of you? Like, let me get my corner infielder with some speed in Jake Bauers.
Yeah, this was a really difficult turn for me as I was thinking about it. Number one, if Eric Hosmer had made it back to me at that pick, I probably would have taken him. He's already a value going where he's going at drafts at like an ADP of 167. This far back in the draft, so like pick 193. He's a $15 player in my valuations. And this is probably like $6 or $7 worth of value that Clay got from drafting Hosmer. So I would have taken Hosmer just as a value pick. And that's one thing that I started to prioritize as I saw the draft board kind of playing out, was just trying to maximize the value that was there on the board, because there was just so little, I felt like. And so I was really trying to get that. This decision came down to, I knew I was going to probably take Will Smith coming around, just because I only had my one closer and things get real kind of sketchy. And I knew that, like, Trevor May win, AJ Minter win, Alex Calla may win, Pedro Strop win. I knew if I didn't go with a closer here, that there would be very slim pickings coming back around. And so it was really between Jake Bauers and Max Kepler. That was the decision that I was making. It was Jake Bauers, Max Kepler, and Ryan Braun. Three guys that I absolutely adore. Like, I love those guys. Those three guys I love. And they all happen to be going at the exact same place in the draft, right? Like, actually not true. Bauer's ADP is like 220. Kepler's is 240. Braun's is now closer to like 190. So Braun is, probably the you can get all of these guys, but in this draft, I knew there was no freaking way that it was going to happen. I just knew that there was no way that any of these guys were going to get back to me after it left. And so I knew that I was going to get Kepler, Bauers with this first pick here, and that I was probably going to take Will Smith, assuming that Brant Chester didn't go there already. He already had Jansen and Alvarado, so I kind of felt like he wasn't going to go with Smith, and so that's why I didn't pick Smith first. So I was thinking, and I was like, more than Max Kepler and Jake Bauers, they are many things, but batting average is not necessarily going to be their strong suit. And I was feeling a little weak in batting average and stolen bases at this point. And so I felt like going with Bauers and the stolen bases, even though I think, Kepler may potentially have a better year or has maybe like higher upside, or I don't know. Like, I think Bauers is really good. I think there's a little bit more variance because of the plate skills than Kepler. And then Braun was another guy I considered because of the stolen bases. But the first base eligibility for Bauers was important because at this point I didn't have a first baseman, and so the first base outfield dual eligibility kind of was the tiebreaker there. So I ended up going Bauers, and I was definitely like a little heartbroken when Clay took Kepler, right after Will Smith, and then Ryan Braun was the next player to go off. Like, I knew those guys were like going to go around the same time, but I just felt like, I was just holding on to a hope and a prayer that they'd make it back to me around pick like 120. But that there's no chance in hell, if I was being honest with myself, that was going to happen. So, that could be a really important place right there. Like, who ends up being the better player this year, Bauers, Kepler, or Braun? I think, that'll be a key decision that I made at that point in the draft.
I like it. That's what I was wondering when I was looking at it. I know how much you covet like Kepler and Braun and Bauers, that little threesome there, and to see them go right after Will Smith. And when you look at the draft board, it makes sense why you took Will Smith, because it goes quick. Shortly after Strop, and then going through 15, you mentioned Trevor May, Minter, and Cole may all go. You would have been in a very bad spot if that would have taken place. So it makes sense. And that's kind of how, when the draft dictates certain moves you have to make, unfortunately, and that's just the way it goes. Because I have a feeling if there were some more closers on the board, you would have still gone Bowers, but then taken a Kepler or a Braun there to keep going. So it'll be interesting to see how that all turns out. It'd be one to watch for sure, Bowers versus Kepler versus Braun. And that's kind of the decisions we make through our drafts. And that's kind of the good and the fun about looking back on it, and sometimes not fun about looking back on it. But at the end of round 15, you got another corner infielder in Justin Smoke, who is a consistent monster that not many appreciate. Obviously, in a Champions League like this, they appreciate it because he doesn't go this high in a lot of drafts, but a darn good pick there. And he followed it up with Kevin PR, another guy that no one appreciates. So what's your thoughts on your Toronto Blue Jay connection there at 15-16?
My 1-2 Toronto Blue Jay connection. For Smoke, at this point in the time, like one of the things I mentioned, I was going for balance. If you look through my team, like Altuve, Bogarts, Puig, Sanchez, Rosario, Perez at the time, Bowers, and then Smoke, the lowest projected home run total of all of those guys, I think, is 18 home runs by Altuve. So I had a pretty balanced approach for power, but I didn't necessarily have a ton of higher power guys. And so Smoke is projected for 28 home runs this year. He was better in the second half. I don't know if the outcomes were better, but the skills were definitely better second half of last year. He should bat cleanup in that Blue Jays lineup, which isn't going to be super good, but he'll have plenty of opportunities to knock in base runners. So this was really like a home run, and recognizing that my RBIs might be a little soft too at this point in the draft. So that's why I kind of went with Smoke in that spot. He seemed to be the best, or at least the most reliable in terms of power corner infielder at this juncture, who plays every day and so on and so forth. I went with Pilar here because there's some really nice things that are going on in his profile towards the end of last year. He always makes a lot of contact. He always has terrible plate discipline, but he started hitting the ball in the air more, and he started hitting the ball with a little bit more authority. And so that for me, was a little bit of the impetus for going with him right there. Like you'll look, Cedric Mullins had already gone. He was a guy that I was going to target, again, well before his ADP. Marcus Semien was a guy I was just hoping and praying that Semien was going to get to me. Like that would have been absolutely incredible for him to get there, because I really love Semien right now. And I love the Semien, Simmons, Polanco, threesome there at shortstop later on in drafts. He almost got to me, but went to Adam Ronis, 2 picks before me. So that was a little bit of a bummer. So I wanted to address stolen bases in a fairly balanced profile. Pilar, here's a little bit of a rundown on his power metrics towards the end of last year. Again, small sample sizes applies, but plate appearances, he had 366 in the first half. He hit 247 with 8 home runs and 11 stolen bases. In the second half, he had 176 plate appearances, 262 average, 7 home runs, and 3 stolen bases. His ground ball rate went from 38.4% in the first half to 29.9%, which is very low in the second half. And his barrels per plate appearance jumped to 7.4% from 2.9% in the first half. And so it seemed to be a situation where he was elevating the ball more, hitting for a little bit more power. So I felt pretty comfortable grabbing him. He's pretty consistently a 15-15 guy. So he addressed speed without hurting me too much in either batting average or in home runs. And he's a guy who should get a vast majority of the playing time there as a really good defensive outfielder. So I went with Pilar there for that reason. And it was interesting to see, like, after that, some of the guys who went, some of the guys that are going much later, like Greg Allen and Wilmer Flores, they kind of hopped up in the draft. So, I'm not, like, thrilled with that turn right there, but I think it's solid enough.
No, it's an interesting one because I do like Pilar quite a bit. He gets forgotten. So it's a good one. And then you mentioned some interesting picks also. Right before that was Alex Reyes, and then Forrest Whitley and Peter Alonso. So a lot of youngsters right there. And then, Greg Allen, like you mentioned, Odubel Herrera, Wilmer Flores, a kind of slew of interesting picks there. Coming back to you, LeMahieu, there goes Ryan Zimmerman, Josh Bell right before your pick. On the 17-18 turn, you go Animal Sanchez to get your 5th starting pitcher. And then Kyle Tucker and Corbin Burns go, a couple more youngsters. Brent Chester must love those young picks there. And you go Kevin Kiermaier, who could be an insane value here if he can just stay on the field. So give me your thoughts on Anibal Sanchez at the end of round 17 and Kiermaier at the start of round 18.
Yeah, well, I love Anibal Sanchez. He's a guy who I owned for most of last year. Like right out the gate last year, his skills were really nice. So I think I picked him up in like the middle of April on some of my 15-team leagues. He just has really nice skills. Like when you look at the skills, the swinging strike rate is really nice. The O swing is really nice. In zone contact is really nice. So the strikeout skills, a little bit of some concern in the control metrics. He's not in the zone a ton. And he, his first pitch strike hasn't been tremendous, but, good enough. And the skills are really nice. I like the Nationals as a team. I think they're going to be very good. I think they have a deep rotation. They've got a solid bullpen with Trevor Rosenthal and Doolittle closing it out there. So I like that a lot. And I just felt like he's a guy who the valuation of him is just wrong because of both the projections, because they're relying too much on like the past 2 or 3 years. And when you look at his pitch mix, he's got, I think it's his changeup, which is one of the better changeups in baseball, at least from a swinging strike perspective. He started throwing that more. He introduced a cutter as kind of his hard pitch, if you will, his fastball. And that really did well for him. And so that's one of the reasons why the control metrics went a little bit south. But they went south because, batters didn't have as good of a time hitting it either. Had a very low BABIP, which, he earned according to a lot of the, according to X stats, but I'm not banking on that. I don't think he's going to be as good as last year, where I think his ERA was in the high 2s, but if he can be like a 3.5 guy with a K per 9, and a whip around 1.2, I think he can do that. And I think that's really nice going right there. And he's not a huge volume guy, but he'll throw, 5-6 innings every single time out. And he's been a pretty consistent performer last year with the new pitch arsenal. So felt pretty good about that. Kiermaier was just another instance of trying to stay balanced with the power and speed. With Pilar and Kiermaier, I think I'm probably getting 30 home runs and 30 stolen bases in some form. I don't like Kiermaier as a player, but going where he was going right here in the 18th round, I felt like, even if he doesn't perform in batting average, which is my major concern for him, he's probably going to play a decent amount in center field. And I think, he'll hit for some power and he'll steal some bases. And if he ends up getting injured, then he ends up getting injured. And, I looked for a replacement on the waiver wire. But until then, I feel like he can be a solid contributor in terms of stolen bases and a little bit of power. So, again, like trying throughout my draft not to to have a very balanced team where I don't have anybody who's dragging any one category down too much to compensate, and then hoping that, through some additions or maybe outperforming some of the projections, like I hope a couple guys can do, that my batting average is able to be at least somewhat okay. So that's kind of what I was thinking at this turn, at this point in time. There was other guys who I was thinking about. Brad Peacock went a little bit later. I definitely thought about Peacock at this particular place, but ended up going with the Sanchez Kiermaier.
Yeah, I like it. Like you said, it keeps to your balanced approach. And Kiermaier could be a great pick if he just stays healthy. A couple of guys I might have debated with him on was like Steven Souza and Trey Mancini. They went right after him. They're a little more risky and might hurt you in certain categories, where if Kiermaier stays healthy, like you mentioned, level all the way through. Your next pick is Francisco Cervelli, but what I want to ask you real quick is right after Trey Mancini, so 2, 4, 6, 8 picks after your Kiermaier pick, was Wellington Castillo, Beef Wellington. Was Salvi Perez going down? Were you like already targeting Cervelli, or was Perez's news not out yet, or do you just not like Wellington Castillo?
Yeah, I'm not sure when I learned that Sal Perez was going to be out. I think it might have been after the Kiermaier pick. I like Wellington Castillo a decent amount. I do think that I have Cervelli ahead of him in projections. I can double check that really quickly, but I like Cervelli a lot, so it would have been close. I do like Castillo. I may have gone with him just because I think the power may be a little bit better than Cervelli. Yeah, Castillo is projected for 15 home runs, whereas Cervelli is projected for 10 home runs. So I might have gone with Castillo. They're both $8 players. He had fallen a little further, I think, than he usually does, or at least it felt that way. So Castillo might have been the guy that I went with in that case, just because I think he may be a little bit better of a replica than of Sal Perez than Cervelli is. But I really do like Francisco Cervelli this year. The batted ball quality that he had at the beginning of the year, and particularly in the plate discipline and the zone contact before he got injured, was really, really good. And so I think if he can kind of get some of that back, obviously he's got a really good hitting catcher behind him in Elias Diaz, and so that gives me a little bit of concern. But I do like Cervelli a lot, especially where he's going in drafts. I feel like he's really nice. Even catch one if you're, if you've waited that long, but he's a really nice catcher too, a real top end guy from my perspective. So I was happy to get him where I did, although I think it was a little bit earlier maybe than he usually goes, but I didn't want to mess around with any of the other catchers that were still left on the board. I didn't like them a ton. And so that's why I went with Cervelli here. It may have been a little bit early. Tucker Barnhart went, although Tucker Barnhart didn't go, he went before I would have had another pick. So I don't know. I feel okay about the Cervelli pick. Obviously, the big thing for the Sal Perez that hit me good is that would have given me a huge advantage, obviously, at that position over other people. And I was a little soft on power. I normally am coming out of drafts and RBI. And so, the Sal Perez just hurt because he kind of was best at some of the categories that I hadn't prioritized necessarily throughout the draft. And so that was pretty painful right there, but oh well, it happens. And I was really lucky with Sal Perez. I got him. I drafted him the latest of anybody. That's why I drafted him. He was at pick 134 at that point, and I have him as like a top 50 player overall because of the two catcher bump that he gets. And so I was really excited to get him where I was. Sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, I love the value you got, and next year it'll be just fine. And take him again in the 9th round. There's no problem with that at all. I got Cervelli as my catcher too as well, so I like that pick a lot. And to finish off your 1920 turn, another Pittsburgh Pirate, a guy you like quite a bit. And again, you got Chester going with Dylan Betances, which is okay, and then Chris Paddock. He's got a young team coming over there. But you went Adam Frazier with your 20th round pick. I know you're really, really high on Adam Frazier. Lots of flexibility on your roster. What is it that people need to know about Adam Frazier?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Frazier a lot. I really don't like second base this year. If you don't get one of the first 10 or 12 second baseman this year, I think it's really shallow pickings. Frazier is a guy that I like, a good deal. Last year, he went down to the minors, and after he came back from the minors, he played in 55 games, 196 plate appearances, a 306 batting average, 29 runs, 27 RBI, 7 home runs, and 1 stolen base. And then his skills were really nice. He's always had pretty good plate discipline, 28.1% in those last 55 games. His in-zone contact has always been really good, 92% over those last 56 games. So that helped support that really nice batting average. And then his hard hit rate nearly doubled from where it was earlier in the year to 45.3% over those 196 plate appearances. And his fly ball rate also jumped about 10% up to 34%. He's going to be leading off for the Pirates from everything that I've seen. He should play every day. So the opportunity is there. He may get some platooning against lefties. But, I really like the skills. I think he'll hit for a good batting average at least. Being at the top of the lineup, he should get a decent number of runs. The RBIs won't be great, but those power numbers are really intriguing. Obviously, it's a small sample size, but the skills really supported what he was doing there. And so he's a guy that's going in the around 350. I got him around pick 300 here. But I just really like what he's doing. I think he's a guy who can contribute, a high batting average, maybe 70 to 80 runs, 60, maybe RBI. 15 home runs and then a handful of stolen bases. So at this point in the draft, that's fine for me. And then maybe I'll just know that I want to look for some middle infielders and second baseman on the wire early on in the season. So I felt good about getting Frazier here. I reached a little bit, but it's because I was in desperate need of middle infielder at that point, and middle infield shallows out so quickly that I really wanted to pounce on him and not feel regret of trying to wait and get somebody else.
Yeah, no, I dig it. We get through 300 picks, hitting around 21. A lot of starting pitchers, kind of questionable starting pitchers, starting to go off the board. And then at the end of round 21, you go with one of my favorite values. Like after Frazier, outfielders Soler, Kiki Hernandez, who I do like, Leonis Martin, Brian Anderson, Jock Peterson. The next outfielder off the board is yours at the end of round 21, and Avisail Garcia hitting cleanup for the D-Rays. I like that quite a bit. And then you wrap it around with Mike Minor, another starting pitcher acquisition for your squad. You took Mike Minor in front of the likes of Luke Weaver, Aaron Sanchez, Michael Fulmer, Sean Newcomb, who I know you don't like, Freddie Peralta, and Joe Jimenez. So Garcia, Minor, what do you got for that 21-22 turn?
Yeah, this was a situation where I was thinking about what my team really needed, and what it needed was some power with the possibility of a decent batting average. And I think Garcia right now, he is supposed to bat cleanup for the Rays. They went out and got him, so they obviously like him as a player. Nobody's ever really doubted his skills, or not necessarily the skills, but just that he could be really good. Like, he's a very, very talented player. He just hasn't necessarily put it together fully. But I love what I saw last year for him. He battled a ton of injuries from the get-go. But when you pace out, what he did last year to 600 plate appearances, 242, 76 runs, 30 home runs, 74 RBIs, 6 stolen bases, he's actually pretty fast. Like, he's not a good base runner, so I'm not anticipating that he's going to steal. But I saw a graphic that was put up on Twitter that he actually has the highest sprint speed of anybody in Rays camp so far. Wow. Which I found to be, fairly amusing, because you don't really put that on him. But he had a 278 BABIP last year with a 304 expected BABIP. So I don't think the batting average at 242 was who he is as a hitter. His career mark of BABIP is 332. And I don't think he's going to hit 330 either, but I do think he can hit like 280, this year. He increased his fly ball percentage, his hard hit percentage, his barrels. He has one of the higher, like a top 40 max exit velo guy. And so I like that a lot as well. He was going around an ADP of 200 last year. And so to get him this late on, when I think, obviously there's question marks about whether he's going to be platooned or not, but it seems like the Rays are going to give him every shot to be the DH, at least the full-time DH, or else be the DH sometimes and play in the outfield sometimes too. And so I really felt like he was one of the few guys left that I felt comfortable with both the batting average and the power if he plays. And so that's kind of why I was going with him right here, because with Sal Perez getting injured, I really needed to get power. But I unfortunately also couldn't really sacrifice batting average too much in trying to get it.
I like it a lot. You took Mike Minor on the turn. Some get nervous about him pitching in Texas. Some don't. He showed some pretty good stuff last year. We'll kind of skim through some of these later picks because it gets really interesting. It's a lot of kind of draft dependent. But yeah, like your later pitchers after round 20, you had the likes like Mike Minor, Matt Harvey. You got your boy Boxberger, Jose Urania, who I know you took in the barf as well, and Sandy Alcantara, and then I believe it was Kyle Zimmer. With your last pick, it got cut off on the screen. Yeah. But a lot of depth here with Minor, Harvey, Boxberger, Urania, Alcantara, and Zimmer. Just give me your thoughts on those kind of guys as a whole. Like, what were you looking for to add that to your kind of starters you got earlier, that your stable starters?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, like I knew kind of not having, when I went with Rich Hill and Musgrove and even Darvish, like those aren't necessarily guys who are known for their volume. And so I knew that I would want to go for some higher skilled guys later on who, to provide some volume, and so maybe it's just to mix and match like depending on who their matchup is, or if they have 2 starts that week, whatever it is. Just really quickly as I know how to do things, as you and your listeners can tell, I can talk for a decent amount of time. Mike Minor, the things that I like about him, second highest 4-seam spin rate in baseball, behind Justin Verlander. Doesn't actually work the ball up high in the zone, which is traditionally what you want to see from high spin rate guys. I think that's one of the adjustment he could make to take a step forward. He's a high fly ball percentage pitcher, which is a little bit dangerous for home runs, especially in Texas, but also keeps the BABIP low and has kept him with a fairly reasonable whip last year. His velocity also went up in the second half from 92.6 in April to September when he was at 94. And remember, he converted back to starter from a reliever. And there's been, talk about how he wants to be a workhorse this spring. Take with it what you will for that. But his changeup is also a very, very good pitch. And the 4-seam fastball high in the zone followed with the changeup is a nice little thing. He's also got a curveball, and his slider improved towards the end of last year too in terms of its swinging strike rate as the velocity increased. So he's got all the makings of a guy who can put it all together. And so that's kind of why I went for him. For Candelario, Candelario is a guy who is going to get a ton of plate appearances with the Tigers. He's either going to bat first probably or in the heart of that lineup. Before he got injured last year, he was putting it together. Play discipline was solid. In-zone contact was solid. Hard hit rate was solid. He was starting to hit the ball in the air a little bit more, and then he got injured and it kind of fell off. But he still put together a pretty good season overall, and so I think he can kind of take the next step this year. I like him a lot. It's just a kind of a late-round corner infielder guy. Matt Harvey is a guy that I own in pretty much every single league. I have him in BARF as well. Towards the end of last year, over his last 10 starts, I believe his swinging strike rate was around 12%. Key thing for me with Harvey is that his curveball started to work again. That was kind of a signature pitch of his when he was really, really good back in the day. His velocity is okay at like 94, but his curveball towards the end of last year, the swinging strike rate was above 20% in the last 2 months of the season. And so I'm kind of banking a little bit on that. In addition to the Angels, I'm really interested in the Angels because they've gone like with a very they've kind of reinforced their commitment to analytics. They've hired a bunch of driveline guys. So I'm really interested to see what they can do with Harvey there. He's looked good so far in spring after being injured. Boxberger was just a Hail Mary on like I got him 75 picks after he normally goes. Like he's drawn to me or something like that. But, the skills are okay. I don't love him. Don't love the situation necessarily, although I think Kansas City plays well for a fly ball pitcher like him. I think he's better than Wiley Peralta. So this is kind of my hope and a prayer for a third closer. Mark Trumbo's a guy who had like a period of time last year when he was really, really good, and then he got injured and he was gone. But, he's 2 years removed from putting together a monster season. He still has above league average, barrel rates. He still he hits a few too many ground balls, I think, but he can still hit for power. And that's what I was looking at here. I think he's going to bat, in the middle of the lineup for the Orioles. So the counting stats will be there. Jose Urena, I might be the only guy in fantasy baseball who likes Jose Urena this year. He's like top 15 or top 10 in velocity this year. He started throwing, his slider really improved towards the end of last year. And hitters just have not been able to get to do a lot off of Urena. And his swinging strike rate was up to slightly better than league average for a starting pitcher towards the end of last year. Definitely has some control metric issues, but I'm willing to bank a little bit on that velocity and the possibility that he could integrate the slider a little bit more to improve the skills. And even last year, he had an ERA under 4, and the whip was okay. And so even if he repeats that, doing what he did for me, then that's fine. Sandy Alcantara, he wasn't really on my radar. The one thing I love about him is his changeup. It is very, 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 very good. 25% plus swinging strike rate, gets folks to chase outside the zone. His velocity is up 3 miles per hour this spring. And so that was enough for me to kind of take a shot at Alcantara. Alcantara. Sorry for the pronunciation. Right there, I think he's more of like a bullpen guy from everything that I read, but who knows? Like if he'll take that last step. And then Hunter Dozier is a guy that I really like the skills. very high in zone contact rate towards the end of last year. The ground ball rate was lower than league average. He had one of the higher hard hit rates towards the end of the year last year, and his barrel rate was at 7% over the course of the year. He should get every day at bats somewhere in that Royals lineup, and with Sal Perez getting injured, he may even bat more in the middle of the lineup. And so that's just kind of like he also is first and third, so that kind of covers 3 positions there in terms of corner infielder, first base, and third base. So really like him. And then I took a wing and a prayer on Kyle Zimmer. I already had Boxberger. Somebody had taken Wiley Peralta, and Kyle Zimmer is throwing 96 in spring. He has not given up a run. He's a really good story. He worked in Driveline this summer. And so, if nobody else works out, maybe he'll get an opportunity. And I could see the Royals doing something where Boxberger and Peralta really struggle in spring, or they don't have confidence in them. Zimmer could, could be a good trade candidate for them, right? A guy who until recently was, he was DFA'd by them, and he had some prospect pedigree, but, if they were able to get some value out of him as a closer, and that's a pretty nice story too, a guy coming really from the end of his career back into the big leagues to be the closer. Worse things could happen. So his ADP is like 750. I drafted him here. I felt a little bad about it afterwards. Especially who was it? Eddie Amalgar drafted Jason Vargas, who I really liked as a starting pitcher, who I thought maybe I could pick up in the first Fab run. But, overall, a lot of the guys later on, there's not a ton of great stuff there. So I just kind of focused on guys who recently have shown better skills or a reason why I think they might do well, and really focusing on volume with starting pitchers there.
No, I like it. It's a lot of good flyers there. Alcantara's got some very intriguing stuff. Urania's a guy, maybe spot starter type stuff. He can be sneaky good. I agree on Matt Harvey. Big fan there. I took Trumbo late in my draft. I love that power upside at that point in the draft. And then Candelario's always had a kind of soft spot with me. The hit tool is really, really good. Just hasn't found the consistency yet. So definitely a lot to like there. It might not stand out right now, but maybe it did as you were drafting. If you can't think of anybody, it's totally fine. Were there any just severe snipes when you were waiting for a guy and then boom, someone took him right before you?
Less so, I guess, snipes so much as just guys that I was hoping were going to get back to me. The Semien one hurt. He shouldn't have gone there, right? He totally should have. He should have been gone before then. I was just felt like he was so close to getting to me, and I really wanted Simmons, Polanco, or Semien in that particular case. And so, that was something where I ended up going after Bowers and, before a couple picks. And the reason why I went with Bowers there too is that, I know I needed a first baseman at that point in time, and I knew that nobody else at first base was going to have speed. So if I wanted to keep pace and speed, having him as my first baseman would be pretty beneficial. So the Semien one definitely hurt. If he had gotten back to me, I think that would have been a major steal. The Mondesi one we talked about with Bogart. I do have Bogart rated slightly higher, but the Mondesi stolen bases, I was at least intrigued there. David Price at 104 was another example of that. And then Hosmer almost getting back to me at pick 194 was kind of another example. But, when it comes to sniping, it's going to happen in a good draft. And I think about it less so as sniping is just guys making good picks at that point in the draft. If somebody, snipes you on a guy by jumping ADP, in the 7th or 8th round, maybe, that's a snipe. But, in those cases, it's just a matter of me hoping that I got lucky and a guy who I valued pretty highly was going to get to me. And there was a couple instances where I was a couple pick short, but overall, the draft kind of went how I had hoped for. The Perez injury obviously, hurt things, and it changed the complexity of the back end of my draft just because I needed to target power maybe a little bit more than I would have liked, power and RBIs. And so, but overall, the team I feel okay about. I think in the projected standings, I may be third in the league, but that also probably includes Sal Perez. So I don't know the pack in the projections, but I feel like I have a balanced team, which is a little bit of an insurance policy. Like there's nobody who's going to get injured and just totally destroy my home run totals or totally destroy my stolen base totals or my batting average outside of Jose Altuve. So, we'll see. I have a nice base, and it's just a matter of making the right picks and starting the right guys week to week so I can maximize the profit potential on it.
Which team was Kenyatta Storin?
Kenyatta Storin was team 10.
Okay, because on Smata's scale, he's the highest ranked out of this league. And he went Sale, Story, Rendon, Crush, Dahl. You got Kershaw. He took Eloy as a sneaky one. You got Hamilton. He kind of has a somewhat balanced approach, a little bit of a few. Like he got you on the Peacock pick you mentioned earlier. He waited and got the Barnhart, Zunino back-to-back catchers, which is interesting. But, a pretty balanced team overall. I kind of like it. But that's who they have as number one in your league. But your draft, like looking at the overall projections, I find that hard to go with because there's a lot of like crazy smart picks here. Like we've been talking about the whole time. Just guys, like I mentioned, where I would get guys in my draft compared to where they're going in your draft and whatnot. And it kind of just goes to show you where the mentality was in your draft. We did barf together, 14-team OBP league. This is a 15-team batting average, no trade league. How do you compare what are your thoughts on your two teams, like comparable wise?
Yeah, well, I mean, I felt good about I felt really good about my barf draft. I felt like going into it, we drafted on February 9th, I think. So like early February. So, a lot of times it's before people have really had a chance to dive in. I haven't really played an OPP quality starts league before. So it was kind of new. I did a bunch of research just thinking about what the strategy is that I wanted to employ in barf. And one of the things that became pretty clear pretty quickly to me in barf is that, the elite starting pitchers get additional value in quality start leagues because so few pitchers now go the 6 innings pitched required on a regular basis to get the quality start. And like the top 8 in quality starts were like between 28 to 25 quality starts. And then there was just a huge drop down to like 18. And so because of that, I really targeted starting pitching early on. My first 2 picks in barf were DeGrom and Bauer. But one of the things that I like about OBP leagues is that a lot of folks do play average leagues. And so a lot of the ADP that you might go off of if you don't, kind of do your own OBP valuations, might provide some opportunities for a little bit of value from an OBP perspective. And so I felt like there was a couple instances maybe where that, was the case in the draft. Like I got Jake Bowers and Max Kepler late. Both of them, I see their biggest weaknesses as their batting average. But, they both have very good walk rates and very good eyes. And so I felt pretty good about that. I think overall, like my team, like Steven Souza, Andrew McCutcheon, guys like that who are better in OBP leagues because of their walk rates. Travis Shaw is in a similar position right there. So I felt pretty good about both of these drafts. A lot of the same guys, Mike Minor, Joe Musgrove, Matt Harvey. I have in this league, Jose Urena as well. So, overall, there's some trends. And in a lot of my drafts, I always find myself buying the same players every year. I'm like, all right, you got to diversify a little bit more. But if I value a guy higher than another guy, or I like a few guys in a particular area of the draft, it's very hard for me to pass up on them if I think that they're the best player. So I've done a little bit of that, a little bit of playing around, but I really like my 2 drafts so far. Barf more so than the TGFBI. I think the challenge with the TGFBI thing is that I think everybody has a really good team. And one of the things that's very difficult is before every draft, I have a spreadsheet where I have my targets for where I want to get to. I never get to my targets because it's essentially what would get you first place in every single category. So essentially like 14th place plus or second place plus 1 in all of the categories for the last year. So I use like the main event, for instance, in this. And normally I'm not at those marks, obviously, but like I'm closer. I'm in like the 90 percentile. Like maybe like in the mid 90s. In the TGFBI draft, see where I did finish. yeah, it was like high 80s, low 90s. In terms of hitting 80th percentile in all of them, the only place I had that was in stolen bases. I was like 95% of the way to the 80th percentile in some of them. And so part of me is like, oh man, I'm not there. It was a bad draft. I didn't do well. And then another part of me is like, well, I've already taken Sal Perez out of that. And it's also like, there just was no value. Like all of the guys that I normally rely on to get me value and to get me closer to that total are guys who were going. They were gone. And so that value didn't exist. And so it was kind of like I had to totally reimagine what a successful draft looks like, because I wasn't going to get close to any of those metrics. And if other people have, like, I give them like a huge kudos, but I doubt that anybody is like fully satisfied out of that group about the way their draft went, only because like it was just such a difficult room that it really suppressed like your accomplishing your goals for the draft that you set out to ahead of time.
Yeah, no, that's well said. It's just tough to set a certain bar when the bar is already set so high when you go into this draft room. So you can only get as close as you can and go from there. And like you said, when you won last year, the draft's just the first part of it. You have to work that wire. You have to do a lot of things a lot of roster management throughout the season, and with no trades, it makes it really interesting. Makes that balanced approach probably a little smarter at times. I know Rob Silver and others have said, don't treat it like a GPP in daily sports like some like to. You need to have that balance. You need to have that depth. Don't get too flashy and then work the wire like you like to do. And some of these other guys like Vlad Sedler is phenomenal at it. Modica and those other guys, NFBC guys that they dominate year in and year out for a reason. So very interesting there. That's where I need to get better is the fab market. That's the one that gets me good. All right. Let's take we have a listener question. We already answered one on Twitter. If people want to go follow the lead, it was Keeper League, Severino or Pham. We both went Pham. I'm concerned about the shoulder of Severino and Pham. His shoulder injury doesn't bug me as much, and I'm just a big Pham guy. The other question, we all had Pham there. The other question is from JDub at JDub the Gamer. How did the unconventional bullpen use of the Rays impact your valuation of their pitchers, if at all?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends. I mean, from everything that I've heard, Charlie Morton is going to be a traditional starter. Tyler Glasnow is going to be a traditional starter. Blake Snell is going to be a traditional starter. And they're going to use the opener in the other two. One guy that I like a lot is Yanni Chirinos. He pitched pretty well last year. The skills improved last year as he pitched. And so he was really good. And the opener can be a real boon. Like, just look at Ryan Yarborough, right? Like, Ryan Yarborough was solid last year, but got a ton of wins because, man, once the opener's done, like, if you come in with a lead and you're the first guy to pitch, like, that's your win to take, right? Like, all you have to do is throw, a third of an inning and you can lock up that win. And you also bypass the first three batters, at least, of the batting order. And those are the best those are the best hitters traditionally. Maybe you get the cleanup guy, but and so I think in those cases, like, that's a boon to Yanni Chirinos, maybe Ryan Yarborough as well if he's in that same role. And so that's what I would say is that's one of like the early waiver wire targets in shallower leagues at least. Maybe a guy like Yanni Chirinos or Jalen Beeks was a guy that I used towards the end of last year as well. Obviously Ryan Yarborough if he's in that role again, but the guys who follow the openers, if you're looking for wins, that's a really good way to scavenge them. And the Rays lineup is good enough where, a decent amount of the time they're going to be scoring in that first inning and you can take advantage of it. So it kind of impacts some guys that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be rosterable as middle relievers or even as guys who start off and don't necessarily make it to the fifth inning every single time. For the guys who are starting like Snell, Morton, and Glasnow, I think Morton and Glasnow, I don't see them going beyond 6 innings many times this year. They had real third time through the order challenges last year. Charlie Morton got eaten up the third time through the order. Like, he would start would be tremendous and then just implosion. He still ended up being very good, don't get me wrong, but that's something that I think the Rays will be very hip to. Snell is very good, obviously, and I think they are going to have a tremendous bullpen. I think the Rays are one of those teams. I think you mentioned this maybe on the last podcast with Eno too, Bubba, but the Rays are one of those organizations that you just kind of trust the way that they use players because they have a history of turning guys who are rejects from other organizations or who don't have as high a prospect pedigree and turning them into something more valuable. So I don't know. What about you? What do you think about how it impacts the Rays pitchers?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. It's in like Bar, for instance, they suck because quality start league over wins, so you're screwed
Absolutely.
there. That one really stinks. But yeah, the wins leagues, I've had Yarborough in a couple leagues last year. I know in TGFBI I had Trinos until he got hurt and he was money. I really like Trinos, like you said. Good strikeout stuff there. I like him better than Yarborough. Yarborough got it done, but he had some questionable outings at times. But yeah, I like Trinos. A guy like Stanek's interesting to pay attention to if you really want to play that bullpen type game because he's usually the opener. He'll go like 1 or 2 innings and strike out like 5 guys. So if you want to get real weird with it, but yeah, if you're looking for wins, it's Trinos, it's Yarborough, and it's gonna be really interesting because I think we're gonna see it a lot more this year in other teams too.
Yeah,
we saw it in the postseason on a lot of teams, and I wouldn't be shocked if you just go on roster resource and look at some of these starting rotations around baseball. It is bad. It is really, really bad. So there's you can make a case for probably at least a dozen teams that need an opener for the 4th or 5th starter. It's really bad. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on as the season goes on. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in Fab because it is a great source of wins. It is a phenomenal source. And the way people saw it play out last year, I'm curious how aggressive people are. Like, if, say a Ryan Yarborough type, but for another team drops, how much more does someone spend on a guy like that compared to, your streamer where you're going to go for $1 or $2? You're going to get a guy that is going to not have to face the heart of the order at the worst times or as often per se. Going to get you 4 or 5 innings. Going to have a shot at a win. Ratio should be decent. It's going to be real interesting to see how that plays out. The way since now we've got good kind of evidence, at least one sample of how it plays out.
Yeah, and your point about Fab, I think, is critical. Like that's one of the things that I'm going to be like all over first time through the rotations is who are those guys who are open, who are the openers, and then who are the guys that are following them on teams because that could be really golden. Like imagine like somebody like the Padres, having like a high skilled reliever pitching that first inning and having Matt Strahm come in after that. That would increase Strahm's value significantly. There's other guys like Robbie Erlin and other guys in that team who maybe could benefit from something like that. So I think it's gonna make things super interesting. I'm looking forward to it for sure. Just out of curiosity, like, do you prefer wins as a category or do you prefer quality starts as a category?
God, that's a fun one. I wish Sammy Reed was on right now.
I know. Sammy's in barf too, so.
Yeah, I know his feelings on this. I think you got to go quality starts just the way things are going these days. But it's tough. It really is because the way I've always said it, I want quality starts because it's not fair when you have a guy like Jacob deGrom last year and what do you got, like 9 wins? Like that's just you got penalized for having literally the best pitcher probably in baseball last year, and that's not right. Where in reality, I think you took him in barf because what do you have, like 26 quality starts or whatever, some crazy number that just puts you above and beyond. What I'd like to see done is change the way quality starts are judged. Instead of 6 innings and 3 earned runs or less, go 7 innings and like 2 or 3 earned runs. Give that extra inning. Make them go a little farther so you can't just piece it together with your bullpen. I think that would tweak a lot and kind of even out the playing field on it. But I'm going to go quality starts.
Okay. Yeah, Sammy and Greg from the Barf League, who has a podcast, Roto Sauce, they had a conversation on their podcast, and it was interesting. I like Sammy's idea of like a sliding scale. Maybe it's like 5 innings pitched, 2 earned runs, and 6 and 3 or whatever it is. And yeah, I mean, I'm probably partial to the win. Obviously, like you have difficult dynamics with the openers, which creates additional opportunity for wins and cuts the opportunity for quality starts. So even if a guy pitches 6 innings after that opener, he's not going to get the quality start in that particular instance. Pitchers are going fewer and fewer into the 6th, inning, even when they are pitching well, because managers are doing the right thing and getting them out of the game before they implode instead of waiting until it starts to happen. So I could go either way. I probably lean a little bit towards wins, but I like being in a quality starts league because, it just makes you it adds another layer of strategy that you need to consider, which I find to be super, super interesting. And it also devalues some players, Ryan Yarborough was not awesome to own last year in there. And it's tough when like guys are only good because of their wins.
Yeah, no, it changes things a lot. And it's like that league's OBP instead of average, like NFBC, and that's a whole other animal. Like you were taking Joey Gallo super early because he deserved it. Unlike other leagues, you kind of get sketchy about stuff like that. So it's different strategies. I think we're going to see more and more OBP leagues too. It makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But it's fun to see all the different ways you can tweak fantasy leagues and make it work. And that's kind of the fun of the two we're in. It's kind of get both sides of the pie there.
Yeah. And doing that live draft was a lot of fun. I had a great time meeting you, meeting Sammy, meeting Greg, meeting Justin in person, like a bunch of the guys who were there. It was really fun to like just have that live draft. And I love that, like, grabbing the sticker, putting it up on the board. Like that was awesome. Even though the board was pretty high and I'm kind of short and I needed to like stack 2 chairs on top of each other and then like get up there. But that was a ton of fun.
Yeah, that was a blast. There's nothing that beats for like any sport, but baseball for sure, because it's long as hell. People don't understand when you're that many rounds with that many picks, it's a long day. But live drafting is great because you get a great group together, like we had a ton of great guys, and it's just fun, talking to each other, strategy, talking to players, like, oh, good pick or this, or there's so many different ways it went. And it was just fun talking baseball and hanging out for 5 or 6 hours or whatever it was, and it's awesome. I remember the first day I woke up to a Justin DM like 2 or 3 years ago now, asking if I wanted to be in the Barf League. I literally told my wife, I'm like, "Are you seeing this? Like this is awesome." So
yeah.
I was like totally pumped on it.
I've made it.
Exactly. So now it's like whenever we get to it every year, that email comes out to start planning the draft. It's pretty awesome. It's fun. It's only once a year to hang out. We have football, we have baseball, but this last year we did football online because everyone's so busy and it's hard to get everybody together for live drafts. And it's the only live one I do now. Like you said, it's the only live one you've ever done. It's tough to get that many people in a group to make it happen. And
absolutely.
I'm glad we're able to. We had to do it earlier this year, but I'm glad we were able to.
Definitely, yeah. It was a ton of fun. So, yeah, we talked a lot about my TGFBI squad. I'm interested to hear how are you feeling about yours?
Okay, let me grab it real quick. I like it. And obviously, the rankings like it. So
yeah, the projections are into it.
Yeah, they're big fans, which maybe Smada is. No, I'm just kidding. Smada knows what he's doing. But
Smada's stacking the deck. He's stacking the deck for the guys he's friends with on Twitter.
Yeah, he's trying to be friendly to me here. But I had the 6th pick overall, and I'm happy I went JD number 1. It was between JD, Yelich, and Acuna. We talked about it on your show.
Yeah, we talked about that on the pod, yeah.
I went JD number 1. It was Garrett Cole and Carrasco, my 2-3 pick, which
nice.
I got my bang. So I was a big fan of that. And then I went Eugenio Suarez. And then got some steals with Johnny VR and Victor Robles. I'm huge on Victor.
I gotta get him in something. I don't have him yet, and I'm like fiending, biting my nails. Maybe I'm gonna do some onlines in NFBC. Maybe I'll get him there. 12 team. He seems like makes a lot of sense. So
there you go. Then I went like Felipe Vasquez as my 7th pick. Matt Olson at 8. I absolutely love that. I think he's for big boy stuff. My first the first 8 picks I have no problems with. I'm good with. 9 I got dicey. I went and took Mad Bum. I just thought he fell too far at that point, and I'll take the gamble as my 3rd starter. At 10, another speed guy, Ahmad Rosario at shortstop. So between VR, Robles, and Rosario, I'm really happy with my speed situation. And it's not like I have a rabbit where if one guy goes down, I'm screwed. I got 3 guys that can give me all 20-plus stolen base with upside. So I'm happy there. Got my 2nd closer, Jose Alvarado, in the 11th round. I'm not like 100% happy with that, the way things are starting to come out of camp, but it is what it is. And then my 12th round pick, I was so excited when I drafted Josh James, and then the next morning the news came out about his injury, so that was exciting. They went JBJ in 13.
He should be. If I remember correctly, he's out of the rotation initially, but he should be ready pretty early in the season, right?
Yeah, he started throwing again later this past week, so I'm crossing my fingers that things will still go okay. I just got to put him on the bench for a bit. Went JBJ, pretty happy with how his season ended last year, hoping it's not a fluke like it was a couple years ago.
I love that pick, JBJ. Did you see
round 13?
Oh, we talked about that quote that he had right on my podcast when we were talking.
I told you he was hitting coaches right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
When you have JD Martinez as your hitting coach, good things happen.
Great.
And then I took another gamble, and this is where it kind of gets bad for me because if Bumgarner doesn't work out, and then my 14th round pick of Dallas Keuchel doesn't work out, we're in trouble. Wasn't over the moon with that, but again, he kept falling, and I'm sitting there going, okay, Kenta Maeda just went. Then it was, I guess I could have went Colin McHugh or Jesus Luzardo, but I went Keuchel, not my smartest or best moment possibly. But I came back around 15 with Joe Musgrove, so I was happy with that.
Joe.
16th, Wellington Castillo. 17th round, Max Kepler. Very happy with those. 18th, Josh Bell. 19th, Francisco Cervelli. So all in all, pretty pumped on the way things feel like. I'm telling you, it was just weird. Everything kind of worked for me for the most part. The 20th round pick, since I was kind of sketchy with Alvarado, I went and got Hunter Strickland, closer for Seattle, to kind of give me a balance there, which was nice because I was looking at Jeremy Jeffers. He went right before Strickland, so that saved me there. That worked out well. Round 21, Cole Calhoun. Big fan of that one. Kiki Hernandez at 22. I love the flexibility there. I think he's got so much sneaky power that people don't pay attention to because they just think he doesn't play enough. Round 23, my late pitchers, I went just kind of stability with upside. I went like Derek Holland around 23, Jeff Samardzija around 25. I gambled on Merrill Kelly in round 26. And then some of my late round bats, Mark Trumbo around 24. I got Ryan McMahon in round 27. I was pretty happy with that gamble. Round 28, Adam Jones. Round 29, Ben Zobrist. He's leading off for the Cubs. I'll take that chance. And then my last pick was just like a power pick. He's leading off for now, and Curtis Granderson. Nothing fancy, but we're at 30th pick or 38th round pick. I'll give it a chance. So all in all, I'm happy with it. Like my starting team, I really like a lot. The bench, it's more just kind of stability, nothing flashy. But when injuries happen, that's when the fun begins.
There you go. Yeah, and like that's the thing is I feel like it really thins out after pick 250. Not that it doesn't in other years, but it just feels very light to me. There's like nobody I'm super excited about, and maybe that's just because there's so much volatility in playing time and things like that now that it's just hard to really solidify behind a particular player. So
yeah, like that's where guys were all trying to take like chances on guys like Justice Sheffield or just other kind of young, kind of flashy things, or does Dylan Bundy rebound? And I get all the theories, and at that point in the draft, why not? I understand it. I just went with more stability in mind because I liked where my start was. I was like, why take chances now when if something goes wrong, I can fill in with something I'm comfortable with. So that's where I went there. Usually in the past, I think that's where I get into trouble. I like to take more chances, and I think that's what gets me pretty good. Is it just takes one or two injuries, and you're just completely screwed. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I can't wait. We're getting so close. It's just around the corner now.
Right?
Yeah, it's what is it? It's May 10th, and the Mariners and A's play like what, the 25th or something. It's like two and a half.
I think they play on the 20th.
Oh, 20th. We're 10 days away.
Something like that, better. Yeah.
Oh, man, it's going to be great. But all right, my friend, let's wrap this bad boy up. It was a pleasure talking TGFBI and everything else with you. Before we go, let everybody know again what you got going on, where they can find you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Bubba. I really appreciate the invite to come on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, especially for 2 hours at a time. Folks can find me on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. The website is batflipcrazy.com. The podcast is also BatFlipCrazy. Just search for that in your iTunes or whatever your podcast platform is. Definitely engage. I really enjoy conversations and talking baseball, and especially with you, Bubba. So hit me up and follow me on Twitter, and I really appreciate the time.
No, I appreciate it, man. I always enjoy talking with you, and we'll definitely do it again. Toby also recorded with Greg Smith. You mentioned him in Barf. He's been on my podcast. Great stuff he's got over there. It's usually a 2-quarterback podcast, but he's venturing out. He's talking some baseball and some other stuff. Greg is a good dude. So I'm looking forward to hearing that one drop and give that a listen as well.
Yeah. I mentioned on Twitter, it's a 2-parter. We got through the infield in 2.5 hours. So the second part we're going to do later in the week, but it was a lot of fun to sit down with him as well. It was awesome to have like 2 barf related podcasts going on the same day. So
I love it. I love it. But thanks for joining me again, and we'll do it again sometime. Everybody, this is Bench with Bubba, episode 151 with Bat Flip Crazy, talking TGFBI and much, much more. Catch you guys later.